So, hey, we are continuing our study in the book of Ruth today, and I just have to make a confession. I am a terrible gift giver. I am truly awful at giving gifts. In fact, if you ever get a gift from me, and you're like, wow, this is so thoughtful and personal, and it seems to just be so perfect for me, just know I did not buy that, okay? That is not me. I once had an assistant and a friend who put me to shame multiple times a year because she was the best at giving gifts. To the point where, those made-up holidays that they kind of do for the workplace, like Boss's Day or your birthday, you know what I'm saying? Just kind of totally just made up just to give gifts. She would always find things that were just too perfect. I'm a big Denver Broncos fan, and she's giving me memorabilia of things I didn't even know existed. All of a sudden, I'm getting all these toys about one of my favorite movies, Back to the Future, and different things that I could decorate my office with. And it's just man, she just was so much better at it than I was. And my strategy for gift giving, on the other hand, is a lot like this. Do you like Amazon gift cards? Yeah, the game, they sell everything from A to Z. That is my approach. That's my approach to buying gifts. One of the reasons I know Jen and I are so perfect for each other is because we actually give each other the greatest gifts ever on our anniversary. In fact, it just seems like every November 9th, we're sitting across from each other at a restaurant, and one of us builds up the courage to say, I didn't get anything for you. Did you get anything for me? And then when the other person goes, no, I didn't. We embrace, and it is the most romantic moment of my year, knowing that I have my soulmate who also is not one to say, hey, I'm going to get you something that you really don't need. That's me, all right? I'm a terrible gift giver. I don't think that way. It's not who I am. So here's the subtext. In our household, if you want something, you better tell the other person that is what you want, okay? Because if it doesn't end up on a gift list, you are not getting it. And I think to some degree, most of us can kind of relate. When it's invited, you really don't have a problem telling somebody what you want. Meaning, when your parents as a kid would say, what do you want for your birthday? You didn't really have that big of a problem saying, well, I want Hot Shots basketball and I want a Nintendo. You were okay doing that. Now, that's not to say that you can just put anything you want on any list given, right? If your boss were to go to you and say, what do you want for Christmas? You're not saying, I want a Mercedes X-Class. Because we all know you're only getting a pizza party, right? You're not doing it on that list. Which, speaking of gifts from your boss, I just have to share this. When I taught English in Korea, for every one of the Korean holidays, my boss would give me a gift package of soap, shampoo, and toothpaste. And every time I would just think, okay, message received. I get it. I stink. I know that this is true. But if your dad was Jeff Bezos, and he were to say, ask me for anything for Christmas, you would feel no shame in putting down, I want a Hawaiian vacation at the Four Seasons, right? Because he has the means, and he also would probably have the heart to actually provide it. You would have no problem asking for it, knowing that the person giving the gift can actually provide it and wants to give it to you. And like I said, this is still a series on the book of Ruth, and today we're going to talk about Ruth pursuing something that she really wants, but I just recognize it's kind of a funny way to start out a sermon on this topic. But I want you to think about this question right here. Are you willing to ask God for anything? Is there anything that you're just willing to say, God, I want this from? Now, I know that for some of you, that's not an issue. You have no problem bringing anything and everything to God. For others of you, you live practically like atheists, that you don't ask God for anything. The only time you ever talk to God is when your spouse forces you, or you're at the pastor's house and he says, anybody want to pray? And you're like, oh gosh, I have to do it, right? I know that's some of you as well, but I think there's a third category. And the third category of people, what they do is they ask God for some things, but not for others. And they do that for a myriad of reasons. Some people do that because they are scared of being disappointed. that they see God as this cosmic killjoy, that whenever they seem to ask God for anything that they really want, he doesn't give them that, he gives them something much worse. So it's, God, I'm praying that you help me out financially, and boom, you're going to get hit with way more bills. And so you just think, I can't ask God for this because he's kind of mean to me. Now, others of you, it's not that you're scared of being disappointed, it's that you're a little scared of disappointing God. Like, you want things, but you have done this exercise in your mind to tell yourself that that thing you really want, you can't ask God for that because it's selfish. And like, it's something that he really wouldn't want to give you, because in your mind, you're like, it's not really fair to ask God for a car if there's like kids who are starving in Africa. Or, man, I can't ask God for a better paying job because it just feels and sounds so self-centered. And meanwhile, you live a life of frustration because you have all these wants and these desires, and you don't think that anybody is on your side to try and help you. And you just try and get through life. And this is where we're at in the story of Ruth. It's an Old Testament story written in the time of the Judges. A woman by the name of Naomi has left Israel due to a famine, and she's moved to Moab. Now, while she's there, her husband dies, and her 2 sons marry 2 Moabite women, but then her 2 sons die, and Naomi and this Moabite daughter-in-law by the name of Ruth move back to Israel. And once they get back, they're surviving solely because of the charity of a man by the name of Boaz, who just happens to be a relative to Naomi's late husband. And one of the things that's really important for us to understand is at this point in history, women had no standings or rights in the world. And this is exactly how their life would probably continue, of just relying on the charity of others until they die, unless something significant happens. And the most likely thing that could have happened to get them out of this pattern was a system that actually God had created, where he considered the possibility of widows without heirs, widows without sons that could provide for them. And the term for this in some circles is called a kinsman redeemer, or what we'll call a family redeemer, which means somebody who's related to you, who could step in where your deceased husband or children would have left you hanging. So it would happen where they would come in and they would take the land that was promised to you, and off of its bounty would provide for you, that they would marry you, and in some cases even provide an heir to take the place of your deceased child or your deceased husband. So back to Ruth for a second. Is it selfish of her to ask God for a redeemer? To say, hey, I really want you to give me one of those. And I know I just set you up because I'm like, hey, God established this, but like, put it in these terms for a second. Like, just think about this, especially if you're in that third category. You just feel guilty asking God for things, because this is beyond asking God for just a husband. It's someone who is willing to step in for your deceased husband. Like, couldn't it be seen as selfish to say, God, I really want you to give me a husband so I no longer have to work anymore for food? Is it selfish to say, God, please give me a husband so I am elevated in my status, because I've just been this field worker for the last several months, and now I want to go and live like one of those in our city who have status and standing? Like, is it selfish? Now, for us in this day and age, is it selfish for you to include God on the dreams of your life? Whether it's starting a business, getting a degree, having a child, or what about quite literally what this passage is about, the desire for companionship and a spouse. See, my fear is that many of us, we don't bring our desires to God for a myriad of reasons, and I believe that that is a mistake. In fact, consider these words from Jesus' half-brother James when he writes in James chapter 4, starting in verse 1. It says it this way. It says, "What is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires that are at war within you? Verse 2, you want what you don't have, so you scheme and you kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong and you want only what will give you pleasure. And if you're in that third category, you might be looking at this and saying, well, yes, Matt, but look at that last verse. Like, that's why you shouldn't ask, because your motives are all wrong. And to that, I would say, wrong. Here's what this is saying. Not everything you want is good, but there are some things that are. And if you're lumping everything that you want into a category and not including God in it, it is going to have ramifications. And so what happens, so even the things that are good, by cutting God out of them, you open yourself up to trying to accomplish these things in the wrong way. So let's just take companionship for a second. So you have a desire for it. It's not a bad thing. God has established this. God even would say it's a good thing. But you don't bring that desire to God. You don't ask him, hey, play a part in this. And as a result, you try accomplishing it in your own power. So rather than saying, God, show me who is the right person for me, you start figuring in your mind, who is the most appealing person to me? Or what you start doing, you start looking at your friend's spouse, and suddenly you're no longer necessarily a good friend. You start feeling animosity towards that person because they got something that you wish you had. And suddenly this whole cycle of frustration and strife and jealousy and ultimately death of a relationship takes over. And in large part because you have desires. You have things that you want. And not everything that you want is wrong. And by trying to keep God out of it because you have already decided what things are honorable and which things are not, you don't give God the ability to work within your situation, to provide something for you that is greater than what you could ever possibly imagine. And so here is, if you don't get anything else out of today, get this. Trust God with your desires. And we'll talk about this more in a minute. But trust God with your desires. And Ruth 3 is the story of an honorable desire. It says in verse 1 of Ruth chapter 3, one day Naomi said to Ruth, my daughter, it's time that I found a permanent home for you so that you will be provided for. For those of you who don't speak Hebrew, this is Naomi saying, Ruth, you need a man, okay? Like you need to find somebody and you need to get a home where you're going to be provided for, a place of rest, security, certainty, and comfort. And so Ruth is having this conversation with Naomi, and suddenly she realizes she has not thought about this much at all, but Naomi clearly has been thinking about this for a while. I don't know, have you ever had a conversation with somebody where it's the first time you're hearing it, but you can tell that other person's been thinking about it for a long time? If you haven't, you've never been married, okay? Like that's how this works. So Naomi has a scheme, and she is ready to roll. It says in verse 2, Boaz is a close relative of ours, and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his young women. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. She's saying, like, he is an eligible bachelor. He is perfect for you. He also fits the parameters. He is one of our family redeemers. And he is going to be winnowing some barley. You know what I mean? Now, just so you're clear, that's not a euphemism. He's literally like winnowing barley. So here's how this would work. Is like you would grow barley in your field, and as it grows, you would harvest it, and it would be full of the barley and chaff. And so what you would do is you would go to a hillside where there's a platform, and you put your big pile of barley plus the chaff there, and you take your pitchfork, and on the side of the hill, you would toss it up at night when you'd have a nice cool breeze. It would blow all the chaff away, and the barley would fall back down. Now, more than likely, Boaz did not own this platform. It was probably shared by several other farmers within Bethlehem. And so multiple farmers would have to use this, and you'd have to kind of like have a rotation of sorts. And so this was Boaz's night. So he's going to go and he's going to winnow the barley. He's going to throw it up in the air, The wind's going to blow it away. It's going to fall back down. But because this is not on his property, and because it is a public space, when he's all done, he's going to have to stay for the night and protect it. Or in other words, he is going to be by himself the whole night. And the reason why this is significant is because no one wants to get asked out for the first time in front of a bunch of people. You know what I'm saying? Like we all love a good proposal fail video, but you don't ever want to be on the other side of one, right? Because it's public and it would be embarrassing. So Naomi's saying, Ruth, you need to get him alone. He doesn't need any coworkers around. He doesn't need other family members around, because you can't just walk up and say, yo, you want to marry me when there's a crowd, because it's just not going to go great. So a warning before we get to verse 3. Some of the language here may appear shady. In fact, it could have gone shady, but I promise you it's not shady. Let's read it. It says in verse 3, now do as I tell you. Take a bath and put on perfume and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go to the threshing floor, but don't let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. So tells her to take a bath. And just to be clear, this isn't just about smelling good, which is, of course, important whenever you're getting asked out. But more important than that is to signify, I am no longer in mourning. My husband has died, but I'm moving on. So I'm getting out of my sweatpants. I'm joining the gym. I'm going to start wearing makeup again. I'm brushing my teeth and bathing more regularly. And I'm downloading eHarmony, right? That's what she's basically, that's what it's saying, all right? Verse 4, it says, be sure to notice where he lies down, then go and uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do. So look, see where he lies down next to the barley. But don't do this with anyone. He's going to be looking up at the stars, and you're going to go lay down next to him. You're going to be smelling really nice. And this is where it gets a little difficult, all right? Because there are some sexual overtones to some of the language that is here. Because it talks about you're going to uncover his feet and lie down. And just as a reminder, it's you're not doing this with everybody. And you got to imagine, this is the first Ruth has heard this plan. It's probably a little overwhelming, so I just love verse 5. I will do everything you say, Ruth says. I don't know, what else am I going to do, right? So what she does is she goes to the threshing floor that night, and when he's finished eating and drinking, he lays down. Like I said, it's a secluded place. And just put yourself in Ruth's sandals for a second. You are hiding out, watching this guy winnow some barley for probably hours on end, waiting for your opportunity to sneak attack and catch yourself a husband, right? That's kind of what you're the picture here. And there had to be this rush, is he asleep? Is he not asleep? Is he laying down now, or is he just, trying to digest his food? I don't know, she wants to approach him, but she wants to approach him unnoticed. It's kind of like if you've ever tried to sneak out of your kid's room while they're still sleeping, that kind of level of sneak attack. It says in verse 8, after Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he lay down at the far end of the pile of grain and he went to sleep. Then Ruth came quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Like I said, there's some overtones within this. And this is intimate, but just to be clear, nothing has called into the question the morality or the purity of either Boaz or Ruth in this. Not to say that with different people it could have gone a different direction, but for them it doesn't. And we'll talk about that more in a bit. But imagine you're Boaz for a second. You're working hard all night to get your project done. You finish, you eat your dinner, you're laying down to sleep. And while you're sleeping, all of a sudden you wake up. And why? Because your legs are getting cold. And then you sense what all of us really don't want to ever be true when you wake up. Somebody is right next to me. And so, back to your kids. If you're woken up with a child 3 inches from your face, it is unsettling. It is not necessarily your favorite thing. So here's Ruth. She is not sleeping. She's just like staring at Boaz, waiting for him to notice her. And he finally opens up his eyes, and this is what it says. Who are you? Right? Like that's what all of us would react with if we just happen to have somebody show up unexpected. It says in verse 9, so he's asked, who are you? I am your servant Ruth, she replied. Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer. Like this isn't saying just give me some of the sheets. I mean, quite literally that is what it's saying, but it's actually closer to signifying, I want to be your wife, that I want you to take care of me. I want you to cover me and take me, and the picture is, under your wings, which is pretty significant because in chapter 2, Boaz had told Ruth, I'm praying to God that somebody would come and take care of you, that he would take you under his wings. And on this night, she's like, Boaz, how would you like to be an answer to prayer? Right? Like, you asked God for this, and I think you are the right guy. And this is breaking all the rules. A foreign woman is proposing to an Israelite man. A field worker is proposing to the field owner. A younger woman is proposing to an older man. And I just want to be very clear, there's a lot of ways that Boaz could have responded. But this is how he does respond in verse 10. It says, the Lord bless you, my daughter, Boaz exclaimed. You're showing even more family loyalty now than you did before. For you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor. Where, in other words, he's saying, I really didn't think you would be interested in me. I thought that you would be much more excited about somebody else. And so the reason why he probably never approached her was because he just assumed, I'm not her type. I thought you'd go for a younger man. I thought you would go for somebody that was maybe rich, maybe poor. Verse 11 says, now don't worry about a thing, my daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows you are a virtuous woman. But while it's true that I am one of your family redeemers, he's about to drop the bomb. There is another man who is actually more closely related to you than I am. So stay here tonight, and in the morning, I'm going to go talk to him. If he is willing to redeem you, very well. Let him marry you. But if he is not willing, then as surely as the Lord lives, I will redeem you myself. Now lie down here until morning. So Ruth lay at Boaz's feet until the morning, but she got up before it was light enough and for people to recognize each other. For Boaz said, no one must know that a woman was out here at the threshing floor. Then Boaz said to her, bring your cloak and spread it out. He measured 6 scoops of barley into the cloak, and he placed it on her back. Then he returned to the town. So just say it again. He's saying, I'm interested, but I can't marry you yet because somebody else needs to say no. That within this system of redemption that we have put into place, somebody's a closer relative, and they have a right to redeem you ahead of me. So in order for this to work, they need to turn you down. But I want to go back to this thing here for a second of just how many different ways Boaz could have responded. He could have taken advantage of her. He could have snubbed her. He could have led her on. And just, like in a minute, I'm going to go back to the principles of like bringing our desires to God, and we'll talk about some things that are a little bit more universal for all of us. But I want to make sure we talk about one of the obvious things that's kind of like playing out here within this passage, and that is just the companionship that all of us desire with another person. One of the things it means to be human is this desire to find a person that you will spend the rest of your life with. And so, ladies, let me talk to you for a second. Like, who should you be looking for in a partner? And guys, who's the type of person you should become? And I want you just to notice a few of the things that Boaz does, and I want you to take note, because I think these are some things that you should be looking for if you are in a position where you are looking for a person to spend your life with. And that is the ideal man will know how to protect and provide. Now, what does that mean? Well, just based on some of the things that we read right here. The ideal man will protect her honor and her vulnerability. Israel in this time is somewhat similar to the world that we live in, meaning like when it comes to sexual ethics, it's kind of like anything you want to do. And what I mean by this is, had he wanted to, Boaz, he could have slept with Ruth that night. That the opportunity was there. He was a man of high standing. She was a woman of low standing. Nobody would question it. In fact, there probably would have been no repercussions other than if the reputation had gotten out, it might have complicated some things. But had he wanted to, he probably could have. But if you notice, one of the things he does is he protects her honor and he protects her vulnerability. Sex is a very beautiful thing. It's enjoyable, but the truth is it's like fire. It's safe in the right context, and it is deadly when it's not. One of the things that we follow as we read through the Bible is it's supposed to be reserved for marriage. And now why is that? Well, it's not that God is down on fun, it's that God is down on pain. And one of the things that happens within a sexual relationship is there is a bonding. In fact, it's one of the reasons why in the description in Genesis of Adam and Eve coming together, it talks about them becoming one flesh. And the idea is that you are intimately connected now to this person. And I just need to quick time out. What I'm not advocating for is a mindset that we need to, do the scarlet letter A's on people's chests and that, hey, if you've had any kind of sex outside of a marital relationship, you're irredeemable. No. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, you are still able to have incredible relationships. But what I'm trying to say is that sex in the wrong context makes your life complicated. And I know it comes across a little bit as prudish and old-fashioned, but I think if we're really honest when we think about the language that we use to describe it, in our culture, on one hand, we say, oh, it is so casual, it's not a big deal, but in the same breath, we talk about just the dangers of sex in the wrong context. Things like sexual assault, one of the reasons why it's such a big deal is not just because somebody is taking advantage of another person, but because they're taking advantage of one of the most vulnerable and intimate parts of life. And so we have to recognize that there is something more to it than just a natural part and the next step in a relationship. And so for Boaz, nobody would have ever known. Nobody would have batted an eye, and assuming she doesn't get pregnant, he would get away with it. But when given the opportunity, he protects her honor and her vulnerability. Now, the ideal man will also provide physically and emotionally. Boaz sets the right expectations. He says, I may not be the one to marry you. I'm excited about this aspect. I like the opportunity, but I need to level with you. It might not happen. But in the event that he is the one who gets to redeem, he's like, I want to already start providing for you. And it says that he fills up 6 scoops of barley and sends her home with it. And that's 2 weeks worth of food. This was enough to care for her and Naomi for a while. And one of the things I actually believe is that God has called us as men to protect and to provide. Now, I don't think this is a call to you need to get your wife out of the workforce. This is not about subjugation or anything like that. I'll just acknowledge, first 4 years of my marriage, my wife made more than I did, and I said amen every single day. It was awesome, all right? But it's an acknowledgement. Guys, stop taking a step back and expecting your wife or your girlfriend to solve all the problems. Step up and lead when you're called to lead. Don't be lazy. Work hard and find ways to meet her needs. This whole idea of submitting one to another is the idea that you have 2 parts of the marriage who are both looking to honor each other, meaning I should always be asking, what is best for Jen? And Jen's always asking, what's best for Matt? And as we fight it out of who gets to be the one to win, it's not about, I want to get more for me. It's about, how can you win in the process? So ladies, if you are in the position in life where you're looking for somebody, look for somebody who is going to provide for you and protect you. And guys, you need to ask, like, how can I become the person that I'm looking for is looking for? Meaning, learn how to protect and provide even before she says, I do. All right, so getting back within the story of Ruth. In Ruth 3:18, Ruth has gone home. She's brought all the barley. Naomi asks, hey, Ruth, what's the tea? What happened tonight? Like, what happened here? So Ruth tells her, like, well, he wants to, but he can't, like, blah, blah, blah. So this is what Naomi says. Just be patient, my daughter, until we hear what happens. The man won't rest until he has things settled today. And if you've been following with us the last 3 weeks, in chapter 1, Naomi mentions leaving Bethlehem empty, and now she's bemoaning how she had to leave full, but she came back empty. But now, the emptiness is starting to get filled. You can see the hope in her language. But now she recognizes this is in the hands of God. Okay, so let's get back to the thing I prompted you with at the very beginning, about bringing our desires to God. What does it look like to bring every single desire? It says, Ruth and Naomi had this desire for a family redeemer. And I believe they trusted God with it, and we'll talk about that more. But if you're sitting where they were, of God, I really want something. What do I do with this? Well, here's 4 short principles. First, be honest about what you want and why you want it. Because it may feel selfish on one hand, but it could be honorable. And this is one of the reasons why it's important to bring it to God. Because your motives are not always completely righteous or evil. Sometimes what God needs to do is help you refine why you actually want that thing. And help you not see it from that perspective of how can you just become about you, but in other ways about how God can move in and through it. So what do you want him to do is prune it to remove what is bad and keep what is good. Here's the second principle. Hold your desires in an open hand. And this is probably the hardest part, because you have to allow God to tell you no or wait. And when it comes to trusting God with this area, I think it's all about faith. It's trusting God even when you don't always see the path ahead. That's one of the reasons why here at First Baptist, one of our core values is audacious faith. We say it this way: we act with a bold faith, knowing it's not about the size of our challenge, but the size of our God. Even when we don't see the path ahead, we have a confidence that God will never lead us where he doesn't want us to go. And when you hold your desires in an open hand, and you trust with faith that God will either give you what is best, or he will tell you to wait, or he will say, no, that's not for you. We trust. We trust that he ultimately knows better than we do. Here's the third thing. Be proactive in attaining it. This isn't working on behalf of God, but God will often send you to school with a scholarship that you've actually applied for, right? You are more likely to find a spouse if you are actually in a position to attract a spouse. You'll be able to buy a home if you are saving for it. And here's the thing, you will be surprised how often God adds a super to your natural and amazing things happen. And here's the last thing, be patient and trust his outcome. It doesn't always happen fast. It might not play out the way that you originally hoped, but it will always be for your best. Now, next week, we're going to wrap up the book, and you'll see this even more clearly. That within the story of Ruth, Boaz has often shades of God's character. We also see that Boaz is kind to Ruth. He is kind to Naomi. That Ruth is kind, and Naomi is also kind. And a lot of the words that are used within this, we see a picture of God's character on full display. In fact, one of the things that Boaz says to Ruth is, I have seen your loyalty. Some translations say, I've seen your kindness to your family. When Boaz tells Ruth to go back, he says, I want you to show kindness. I want you to not go back empty-handed to Naomi. And one of the words that they are translating is this Hebrew word hesed, which is a really kind of tricky word for us in English because we don't have a word that really has a comparable equivalent because it can mean kindness, love, loyalty, faithfulness, grace, mercy, compassion. It's all wrapped up into one word. And one of the things I just want you to see, especially when it comes to bringing to God the things that you want, is that God has hesed for you. He is loyal to you. He is kind to you. He is showing compassion and grace and mercy. And the greatest description of love within the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable. It keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. And this story today ends with Naomi and Ruth waiting. But love is patient. Love protects. Naomi wants to protect Ruth from widowhood and saying, I think there is a way in which God can move and get you out of the situation you are in. Boaz wants to protect Ruth. Love is pure. He does not take advantage of her. Love provides. Love has a price. Sometimes you have to risk to love. In the same way that Boaz is willing to spread his garment over Ruth to protect and provide for her, God wants to spread his garment over you, to become your refuge, your fortress. God wants to be generous to you. The story of Jesus' given body and his shed blood connects to this as he is giving you hesed. Christ's sacrifice was not what his followers wanted. They desired a Messiah to give them freedom from the Romans. And they multiple times brought that to God and said, we want to be broken free from our bondage. And God, in his wisdom over us, said, I'm going to do so much more than you could either ask, think, or imagine, because I'm going to give you freedom from the eternal bondage, not just of the Romans, but of your own sin, your destructive habits. When you trust God with the desires of your heart, what you start to see is more often than not, God is wanting to meet really the root of most of those desires. And if we could just get our lesser desires out of the way, we can see that he is providing for us and blessing us so much more than we could ever hope for. But we have to start by trusting him with it. God, you give us more than we deserve. You bless us more than we could ever imagine. God, that so often we're blind to the fact that you are working in the background and providing for us. I'm praying, God, that we would stop seeing you as a killjoy that's just trying to subjugate us and make us hurt. But rather, God, we would see you as our protector and our provider who wants to restore the things that were lost. And the God, I pray that we would trust you, that you would be doing more than we had hoped. That God, that we would trust you enough to wait when you tell us to wait. That we would see how you have protected us from hurt and you provided for us in new ways. God, I'm asking that we would even see the way that you've met our eternal desires as the greatest gift of all. That God, as we desire for significance or certainty or love or growth, but God, that you would remind us that you are willing to meet all those needs and more through your Son. That God, that you would even give us blessings beyond that, but we would be as content as we possibly can be just to have you. And so, Lord, I'm praying that for those who are not sure where they stand with God, That God, that you would allow your Holy Spirit to speak to their hearts right now, that you would tell them, I love you more than anything else in the world, that I want to protect and provide for you. I want to restore you. I want to redeem you. And I'm asking you to rest in me, that they would put this prayer on their lips of, God, I'm asking you to forgive me of my sins and take full control of my life. And then, God, I trust you with everything. I pray this in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.